Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. I know what you need, some more rock and read. Today we'll pick up where we left off with the second half of Chapter 5 of Crazy from the Heat by Van Halen's original vocalist, David Lee Roth. Here we go. The psychological term is primary process, the desire to pursue, to see, to experience, to touch, but that is beaten out of us over the years as we grow older. I never lost that, and it upset a lot of people. So I was hustled off to Miss Buck, the school psychologist, and I would get swatted for misbehaving. All the yelling and whatnot, you were made to feel bad. Nowadays, they might have said, "This is a special boy, been sent to special kind of classes," but then you qualified as purely out of line. At the same time, the world was stopping, twisting altogether, and it was beginning to polarize. You could begin to see this with Big Daddy Roth and Eric Burdon and the Animals, and the Beatles versus Lyndon Baines Johnson and the Great Society. Our political involvements at the time were a major construct of that deterioration. The Vietnam conflict expanded by leaps and bounds between 63 and 65. In 65, they finally gave it a name and called it escalation. And we led with our faces. That's when the dissension began. The drug culture entered into the picture, beyond the acceptable diet pill scenario. Now, there were alternative drugs. Marijuana was smoked by the mods and the rockers. Mods and rockers were taking depressants as well as uppers. The word meditation became available to America for the first time. We had never heard the word before. We were surfing. We were busting our buns. We were doing 0 to 60 in 5.5. We were all black guys from London who wanted to hold your hand. In 5th grade, I stole a copy of Harold Robbins' The Carpetbaggers. I had to hide the book under the dresser so my parents wouldn't see it. This was the first time I'd ever read anything of any real sexual content. I knew how everything was supposed to work, but this was the first time I'd read it in lurid, luscious terms. Extreme stuff. I'm not sure if it was the actual story content or just the idea that I wasn't supposed to be reading it. Probably both. Just turned me on and opened my eyes to the wonderful world of human interaction in its infinite variety. Accent on the word infinite right from the 2nd chapter. Look out. Now, I really had a reason to shoplift. Now I had what Dad always called a focus. In 1966, the first truly underground freeform radio station, the first alternative radio station, was started in Pasadena, California by a big guy, a 300-pound DJ named Tom Donahue. I still had the little black and white radio, and I was literally under the covers just dialing around to anything that sounded remotely interesting. One night I arrived at this baleful off-key, one voice and an acoustical guitar. It was Bob Dylan. The DJ played the whole side of the album. Now, let's take a reality check here. Let's freeze the frame. This was the era of screaming top 40 disc jockey. Guys like Humble Harv, on KFWB, Channel 98. Hey baby, hoppin' and boppin' and poppin' with the best top of the pop smash boss beat with the timeless tunes for those with the textured taste. Now here comes a guy with this slow delivery, a half a kilometer in between every word. Hey, that was the new Quicksilver album. Can't wait till it comes out in stereo. Tom Donahue, KPPC 106.7. Do the numbers sound familiar? Because today it's KROQ. It is the alternative, the Chili Peps, the Morrisseys, and the Rollinses. This was the blueprint from which all rock radio that we listen to today was struck. This pointed the way toward the identity of the disc jockey, to the approach, the laconic tone of voice, that kind of homey touch, instead of the screaming introduction for a drag race. Sunday, 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 nitro-burning funny cars. We'd go down to the basement of the Unitarian Church on Colorado Boulevard. It was just a big, empty room with some couches and blacklight posters of Jimi Hendrix and the Doors. You could lounge around in your moccasins and your jeans and your Pendleton shirt. Worker-oriented clothes, you know. That was the hip thing. And we listened to the radio. Before long, other stations would appear where the DJ shows up with a milk crate of his own personal records and plays Bob Dylan for 4 hours. In 1966, the first underground comics came into any real public awareness. R. Crumb's Mr. Natural, anything that was subversive, political, sexy. The whole free speech thing was on the top of the topics to be talked, to be rapped about list. And we started seeing things like Gilbert Shelton's Wonder Warthog and the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. The Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers were Cheech and Chong, with an extra guy. The Three Stooges, but they smoked dope. Almost every single episode would start with the two guys handing $10 to the one who was essentially Curly, the dummy one, and telling him to go out and cop some pot, and in big, bold letters, "Don't get burned." But we all knew, of course, he was going to get burned. He'd waylay himself somewhere and waste the money in some bizarre fashion, or it would be stolen, or he would lose it. That would constitute the next 2 months' worth of misadventure, trying to either get the pot or get the money back. Every episode, comics were cool again. Superheroes? Stop being squares. Marvel Comics, the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, Spider-Man, all became very hip. Even when they were fist-fighting, they'd be making all kinds of colorful hip comments. Whoa, looks like a little fist-to-face confrontation as he's knocking out 3 thugs. This, of course, appealed to me major time. This was very visual. It was very much an attitude. It was exactly cut from the lifestyle we all wanted to lead, wise mouth. We saw every blaxploitation picture, and those movies were a huge influence on me. Trouble Man, Superfly, Foxy Brown, Shaft, Cleopatra Jones, Blackula, Rudy Ray Moore doing his Dolomite vibe. I saw all of those. Blaxploitation obviously means to exploit blacks, or blaxisms. I don't think it was so much exploitive as time come due. All throughout the 60s, all we saw was black people getting sprayed by fire hoses and dragged out of the bar and grills and civil rights marches and whatever. All of a sudden, you have liberation. You've got blacks in all of their finery, whether that's the afro, the bell-bottoms, the platforms, their cars, their slang, their ordnance, alternately living out a reality and a fantasy that was every bit a part of civil rights. You've got Muhammad Ali returning to reclaim his title. He'd finished his gig as outcast for refusing to go to war. You had blacks living out their vision of prevailing. If you were any part of any subgroup that had a self-esteem difficulty or "I'm not part of a large clan" mentality, you could relate to these pictures big time. Dolomite, Rudy Ray Moore, was one of the originals. He was a blue comic doing blue humor, like Red Fox did on early Party records. So he was the most perfect to play a new secret agent. His answer was not Bond, James Bond. His answer was Dolomite, mother. We would wait for that line in all of his movies. They had the cars, they had the shoes, they had the guns, the haircuts, the slang, and the scams. And we all knew that all those beatific resolves at the end of the movie were bull. He's trying to feed the hungry, but he's actually a bull. That was designed to make it palatable to our moms and dads so they'd let us go see the picture. It still rings true, but it was the first time that blacks in cinema really had a position of power, of strength and authority. So we adopted all the slang, all the style of dressing and walking and so forth. There was also a tremendous sense of humor in those pictures. The actors knew that some of this was deeply superficial, and when something's deeply superficial, you're talking about reality. So when it came time, not terribly much later, to start getting on stage and doing what I do for a living, I took elements of comics and soul. I took Superfly and introduced him to Spider-Man. I took Sly and the Family Stone, welded them together with the Human Torch, and I flamed on a whole generation. Dolomite, mother. Right around that same time, several things happened to me, or for me, that gave me an overview that I wouldn't have had otherwise. The first was '67, about half a year before I turned 13. I got my first job in an effort to buy my first real stereo. I shoveled at a local horse stable in Pasadena all 3 months of the summer vacation for $150. I worked with a group of fellas who spoke no English. They were all Mexican. I began to explore that culture a little bit from the inside out. These were all cats who were making $50 a week and living over the horse stalls communally. So I got to see the working blueprint of the real working man. Not the way the working man's been depicted, or at least had been depicted, but the working man the way he is in most of the world. The stables is where I learned to roll a cigarette, because there was a foreman, a guy who used Vaseline in his hair. The single most impressive scene I had ever seen to date occurred during my first season at the stable. He rolled a cigarette with one hand on horseback. This was the ultimate mark. If I was Watusi, I would leave with a spear and come back with a lion. At Eden Canyon Stables in Pasadena, I'd be able to roll a cigarette with one hand. Anyway, I had signed a contract with my father. I borrowed the money to buy the stereo, and I was to work for the summer to pay it back. This was to teach me to be independent and responsible. Well, it did. I didn't want to lose that stereo, and I had to buy my own records. The first 2 records that I actually bought, not shoplifted, were by Creedence Clearwater and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Now, I purchased this stereo after what was perceived as an incident in my junior high school. Essentially, everybody was getting along. It was during gym class and we were playing flag football. Our team was all white except for one black guy, and the other side was all black except for one white guy. There was some conflict about a call as far as how much yardage was actually gained, so I dutifully marched across the line of scrimmage and belted their white guy. They were then duty-bound to select one of their finest to come and belt our black guy. Half of us got tossed out of junior high school for publicity purposes. Indeed, we had great respect for each other. We knew where to draw the line. It's part of sports, man. It's Chinatown, Jake. But the principal was right out of Beavis and Butthead, and in a grandstand play, threw half of each team out of school, much to my parents' chagrin. This happened right before Christmas. I was made to take a variety of entrance exams for private schools of the college preparatory nature, like Choate and Thatcher, military schools, the works. Also the Webb School for Boys. It's now co-ed, has been for a number of years. Back then, it was just for guys. It's a private boarding school in Claremont, California. It was super selective and exclusive. Lo and behold, on the entrance exams, I scored the highest in the history of the school on their humanities/reading comprehension /language skills, etc. The quintessential 99.5 out of 100. And I scored the lowest in the history of the school in the mathematics department. It was a 23 out of 100. Well, there was an instant flag on the play. There was a special case confab, and I was allowed to go to web school. I entered the world of rugby coaches, with names like Ossery M. Butler III, late of the British Navy, who smoked a pipe on the field. Great biologist Raymond Alf was the biology teacher there. My classmates included the Prince of Thailand, the son of the Boeing aircraft fortune, the fellow whose father had invented the Learjet, 4-syllable Anglo-something names. I got a really good taste of what that lifestyle was about. What happens to a person when your family owns a yacht or two? I also learned what it meant to smoke Marlboros. This was the kind of place where you had to wear a blazer with the school emblem, to chapel every morning at 7:30, while they checked your room to see that they were cleaned. You would receive a little note in your mailbox when you needed a haircut. There were instructions. I remember a little yellow piece of paper that said, your hair must be cut so that 1. It is 1/2 inch above your ear on the sides, so that 2. It is 1/2 inch or more above the collar of your shirt. I lasted a semester. I was always in contest with the teachers, or whatever. I loved class. And if you wanted to see what that school was like, exactly what that was like, what the teachers were like, what the students were like, what I was like, just go rent Dead Poets Society. That was it. We would have assembly 3 times a week. There couldn't have been more than 500 guys there, if that many. There would be guest speakers. I remember a senator called the Silver Eagle because of his silver-gray hair that was swept back, and because he was so adamantly pro-Vietnam, pro-military. We sat and listened to him give his speech, and watched him bang his hand on the podium about how we were going to bring the Viet Cong to their knees, while Mr. Hooper, the headmaster, would kind of move around the edges of the assembly seats and check on our haircuts. I came home on one of those 7-week breaks. After 7 weeks, you got a 3-day pass to go home. The fellas like the one from Thailand just stayed at school. I remember coming home and watching the riots at the 1968 Democratic Convention. Mayor Daley's battalions were slugging it out with the demonstrators. Big source of controversy when we got back to school, because you either were a hippie or you came from a very well-to-do background. American nobility. Of course, most of the seniors were very much established. They were all headed for Harvard, Princeton, or Yale. At worst, USC. Us 8th and 9th graders were pretty much opposite. That conflict would represent itself in colorful ways. For example, each grade of students had a monitor. It was like military school. It was a senior who was in charge of that dorm. There was a senior in charge of the 8th graders, one who was in charge of the 9th graders, and one who was in charge of the 10th, and so on. If you got too many demerits, you would lose privileges. Normally on the weekends for an afternoon, you could go down into the town of Claremont, go shopping, hit the record store, McDonald's. These weekend passes were critically important to us because we would go sneak off into the orange grove and smoke cigarettes. If you got a certain number of demerits, you were either looking at lockdown, which meant you couldn't go into town that weekend, or you could get a swat from the senior who had a paddle that was passed from senior to senior each year or each semester. You could get a swat and go downtown, or you could not get the swat and stay in your room. I still have marks. But twice a year there was a day. I forgot what it was called. It was like a Sadie Hawkins kind of thing, where everybody could dress as wildly and bizarrely as they absolutely wanted, especially at meals. We would put toothpaste on our faces like war paint and make our hair into 300 little braids, wear funny sunglasses, wear pillowcases to class, and so forth. And you were allowed to challenge your dormitory monitor, the senior, to an exchange of swats. Okay? You could challenge him. He didn't have to take up the challenge, but this was a true test of manhood. No senior would pass on an exchange of swats with a ninth grader. That would be a fall from grace that could never be reversed. We all had to take a craft class once a week. It was on Wednesday nights. Metal shop, outdoorsmanship, sculpting. I took wood class. Two of my other pals and I came up with a piece of wood that we found in the orange grove one weekend. It had to be an 8x4. It was 8 inches wide and 4 inches thick. It took almost a month to create it, because this thing was a monster. It was a paddle as long as a Louisville Slugger, and it took 2 hands to wield it. I drilled holes through it so that the air could escape, so that you could make more impact upon contact. I didn't even want the thin layer of air to buffer the emotional content that I was preparing to deliver. I painted it gloss black, put white adhesive tape all up and down the handle for the no-slip grip, and we painted the Annihilator in white letters from end to end. All the underclassmen knew about it. Came the big day. The entire underclass turned out for the challenge. I marched out in the little area. The building had 3 sides to it, like a horseshoe. You would go out into the little clearing and call up to the seniors' room. They always had the same room, and you would call them out. Everybody stood around in a big circle, and I called him out. The senior came down. I challenged him to an exchange of swats. He laughed. Now, he had brought his paddle, which was wafer thin. By then, I had become numb to his ministrations. Then I unveiled the Annihilator. It was under a bath towel, and he refused to exchange swats. Everybody went silent. This had never happened, to anybody's recollection, fable-wise or otherwise, that a senior would refuse a swat from an underclassman. And there was dead silence. We all knew that his social life had ended, that he would never be an acceptable human being in the eyes of any other senior. In that in biblical fashion, I had destroyed everything he stood for, without even drawing my sword. I received a letter at home several weeks later asking me not to return for the next semester. The words used were failure to adjust to the web school lifestyle. I learned that Scott and Griff, who were my 2 partners, received the same letter. So, I went back to public school. What's curious now is I've been asked on several occasions to come and talk to the school, to be the guy at the podium, particularly when Van Halen was at its peak years. I must have received 3, 4 different requests to come down and lecture at the school, because now it's co-ed, and I'm certain that it's a bit more liberal. But for me, it was still the Dead Poets Society. It was military school. The only thing missing was the uniforms. Drugs are always included in descriptions of the mid to late 60s. Up until that point, it seems like everything was medicine cabinet. It was rare to run into somebody with some pot. The pot party was something for parents to be terrified of at all cost. We couldn't wait to get invited to one, especially since none of us had ever been to one. May 14, 1968, I smoked pot for the first time during the old-fashioned days parade in Altadena with my buddies Bob and Larry. Bob got some grade C reefer from his older brother, and we smoked it behind the First National Bank building while the parade passed by. I went on to smoke a lot of pot with Barry over the years. I remember the first time he got his driver's license, 16 years old, borrowing his parents' car. We were driving along on a pretty empty suburban street in Altadena. I dropped the roach down on the floorboards. Barry went over to pick it up, and we crashed. This was not the go point for a drug-fueled existence from that first joint. The trappings, the ritual of it, were way more important. Things like LSD, magic mushrooms, mescaline. These all had social trappings way beyond, hey, this is a lot of fun. We junior high schoolers, we were already aware of the downsides of that kind of life, of burnout cases and acid flashbacks, and what have you. That same year, I came home very late from work at the stable. I had been smoking pot with some of my co-workers. I was already a working man, to my way of thinking. I had worked all day shoveling, made exactly nothing. I came home and I was feeling a little low-key. My mother said, "What's the matter? You look a little pale, look tired." "Mom," I said, not thinking, "I smoked a little pot after work. I'm really tired. I think I'm just going to go to bed." She started screaming. This is 1968. They're still showing movies like Reefer Madness in movie theaters. I don't mean like midnight movies of the new art, where it's cool to go down and mouth the words because you've seen it 10 times in a dormitory when you were a fraternity brother. She starts screaming, "Oh my God! Oh my God! Nate! Nate!" calling my father. "He's been smoking pot. You look sick. He says he's tired and he wants to sleep. Should we let him sleep or should we keep him awake?" "I don't know, Sybil. Try and relax. I don't know. Son, how do you feel?" "Oh, I'm a little tired and I'd like to go to bed." "All right, let's go upstairs." Went upstairs, pulled my boots off, laid back on the bed. My father's just kind of watching me. I don't know what he's looking for. Eye movement? I don't know. I must have appeared at least in stable condition to a surgeon, but nobody knew what pot was about. It was a drug, like LSD, like heroin. Who knows? I was laying on the bed with my hands behind my head, just kind of staring at the ceiling, feeling very mellow, ready to go to sleep. My mother is crouching behind my father, with her hands on his shoulders. She's going, "Oh my God, what are we going to do? Should we let him sleep? He says he wants to sleep." My father got a little irate at that point, turned around and he said, "Sybil, you've got to relax. Look, let me handle this. Take the girls," meaning my 2 sisters, "and go to McDonald's and get them some dinner." As she started to walk out of the room with her head in her hands, I remember sitting up like Dracula out of the coffin going, "I'd like a couple of Big Macs, a large fry, and a large pop." She came running back to the bedside, and they were both staring at me in the face, and she's going, "Do you think it's okay for him to eat? Do you think it's okay?" I remember my father saying, "I think it'll be okay." All the early 60s drugs were not hip, because they didn't have the right social connotations. If it wasn't consumed at a love-in with 5 other people, it wasn't cool. But there was a huge market developing for uppers and downers among junior high and high school students in the mid-60s, just because the whole drug culture was at the forefront. It was as evident and depicted as it is today. You hear about it on the radio, the TV, you read about it. 2 buddies of mine in the neighborhood were in on the program. Let's call them Wayne and Garth. Garth was a party pal, not a real good home life, kind of a lost and wandering spirit at an early age. He was about a year or 2 older than me. This is around 8th, 9th grade. Wayne was super academic, the kind of guy who had a chemistry set when he was in 6th grade, okay? He figured out a way to short-circuit the burglar alarms on the local pharmacy. He and Garth broke in one night and showed up in my garage, where we had a little clubhouse with probably 8.5 pounds of pharmaceutical everything. Every kind of upper, downer, morphine, cocaine. Cocaine came in these big Malin Craft bottles. A quart of cocaine, pure pharmaceutical. I really had no idea what to do with any of it. It scared me. Scared Wayne. Garth? He was ready to climb every mountain. But that whole drug awareness culture was just kicking in. The idea of how popular it was, or wasn't, going to be, was not yet upon us as a nation. Teachers were just becoming aware of it. These 2 fellas sold every single ounce of everything that they had stolen. They had the best record collections you could possibly imagine, the best stereo equipment, best everything. They went and knocked off another drugstore in the neighborhood. An even better record collection followed. One day, Wayne's mom is going through his closet, for some reason or other, and discovers a 5-pound bag of every kind of pill you can spell. Now keep in mind, except for Garth, Wayne and I were still waiting for somebody to sell us some pot. When Wayne's mom discovered a 5-pound bag of pills, she took it back to the drugstore, gave it to the owner. Over the years, Garth had been shipped off to half a dozen foster psychological care homes, had run away from home, was living in the back of my garage on a mattress for some months, this sort of thing. He disappeared into the abyss. Wayne owns a security company that installs burglar alarms and security systems for corporate concerns. Internationally, I swear to God, wild or what? I had another friend. Let's call him Bobby. Bobby left high school early and went to Kathmandu in Nepal. In the late 60s, early 70s, it was not anything like it is now. It was right out of the 1300s. It was Constantinople in the 1300s. Bobby brought back almost 6,000 pounds of hashish in the hull of a trawler that leapfrogged out of Nepal. He had made literally over $1 million. That was his cut. There were 3 other guys involved in this. He had made over $1 million by the time he was 24. That was standard. That was so constant because it was considered hip. It was considered cool to do. These weren't cocaine connections per se, although cocaine was hip as well, because you knew the Rolling Stones were doing it. You knew that a variety of popular musicians were getting involved in that. It was considered a cool thing to do. I'm at the age now where I know a whole lot of dead guys, a lot of whom were involved in all this back in the mid to late 60s. This is where we all kicked off. And as I tell you the story of Wayne and Garth, and I tell you the story of Bobby, you can see how we steered off. There's more than one off-ramp on that highway, and I've seen a whole lot of people go down both off-ramps. Everybody might tell you that, but they're horse-ing you. They haven't seen it. They read about it, or they heard about it by proxy. These are guys I actually went to school with, guys that I would sit and listen to records with. What's curious now, after wandering around inside and outside of the drug culture since I was basically 12, 13 years old, is, look at me, I'm a multi-millionaire. My name is as known as the guy on the dollar bill. I'm Mr. Fortunate. I wrote a couple of Beethoven's Fifth Symphonies, and they'll pay my way. They'll pay for my dance lessons and my Mexican cigarettes for probably the rest of my life. It's already done that. Please stay off the towers and don't take the brown acid. Hey man, you got any papers? I was there when that was invented. An important balancing factor for me throughout all this party referencing, drug culture, hippie dip, Haight-Ashbury, whatever, was the martial arts. Karate and kung fu were every bit as tightly woven into the general social fabric as long haircuts and bell-bottom blue jeans. Every movie had kung fu karate in it, whether it was James Bond or Foxy Brown, whether it was blaxploitation, or whether it was Secret Agent Man, whether it was Green Hornet or Quinn Martin Productions. It was a discipline that carried me through all of it. I participated in everything to one degree or another, but throughout all of it, I followed a 2,000-year-old art form. I was involved in Ed Parker's Kenpo Karate. 4 times a week, Mr. Parker was not my best friend. Mr. Parker was considerably more based. I think it was called the Palama Ghetto in Hawaii. Having trained with all of those characters coming out of there, way more than he was relating to a middle-class 13-year-old saying, "Hey man, do you know who Hendrix is?" He was schooled at the end of a stick, and so was I. Shinai, that means it's like a false sword. It's a piece of bamboo about 4.5, 5 feet long, and it's split down the sides, and then tied at maybe 4-inch intervals with twine so that it doesn't split any farther. And you can really whack somebody with it and not have it split apart. You use it for sword training. When you see kendo class, you know, with the helmets, the breastplates, and the skirts, they're using shinai. It's also a training tool. It's the equivalent of the teacher whacking you on the knuckles with a ruler. But if you screwed up in karate class, you got hit with a stick. It wasn't the human hand and gentle, resupportive touch that guided you down the path of proper whatever. That was always my contrast. It was the antithesis of what was hippie, of what was populist culture, what our haircuts look like. I'm so thankful that I did it. I still do it every day. Every day. I do the same stretch that I learned the very first day I went to train with Mr. Parker as a young teenager. In 10th grade, that's right about when we all started turning of age to get driver's licenses. 15 and a half for your learner's permit. A 57 Chevy Bel Air was the ultimate. That's what the whites drove, and you could get one for about $1,100. Then you'd go to work on it. You'd put slicks on it, and you'd raise it up and get the hood scoop and take it down to Tijuana and get a $55 diamond tuck upholstery job. The diamonds would be two different colors, like pink and purple. Or you'd get chocolate and ivory, pink and black. What else? Yellow and black were an incredible set of colors to get. It would cost literally $55, and they'd be done at the end of the weekend. You'd take it, like on Friday night. You'd make the trek, and then you'd drop the car off Saturday morning and stay out in Tijuana and hang out all night and come back Sunday afternoon and pick up your brand new used car. You would take the baffles out of the pipes so it would be much louder and much throatier. At that point in time, of course, not everybody had a car, but everybody had an older brother, whatever, who was in 11th, 12th grade, and you would ride around 6 and 8 to a car. That year for me can be summed up in 3 songs. Whole Lotta Love by Led Zeppelin, Mungo Jerry's In the Summertime, and Alice Cooper's I'm 18. 18, and I don't know what I want. Killer. Those were the songs on the car radio. So 57 Chevys were bad. Let's just stop right at that word. Because right around 10th grade was when that word started to become part of the mood. Up until then, you didn't really use the word bad. In was used up throughout the 60s. That's a surf word coming out of, 63, 64, or dare I say it, groovy. But even then, we laughed when we said it. The idea of being bad didn't really kick in until like 1970, and it was part of an overall attitude change. Instead of a bunch of people at a love-in, and everything was groovy and cool, bands like Led Zeppelin showed up. They weren't about fun in an I'm a pepper, you're a pepper sense. Well, in 10th grade, there was a day off from school, so we could all attend the demonstration out on the girls' field against the bombing of Cambodia. A couple of bands played. Carl Donaldson's band played, Jimi Hendrix's band of gypsy stuff, and some old Cream stuff. The government was sneaking around. There was another acceleration in the war. Jimi Hendrix died that year. Janis Joplin died that year. And the mood turned from love-in into more of a rally kind of thing. Things got a little more unfriendly. Led Zeppelin was not friendly. Alice Cooper was not friendly. Grand Funk Railroad, Black Sabbath, these were not friendly attitudes. The predecessors to punk rock, grunge, whatever, there was a lot of discontent. And visions of a beautiful utopian future, the age of Aquarius turned into Cambodia, and Jimi Hendrix turned into a poster. The music reflected that, and the stage shows reflected that. Suddenly, there was a little more of a violent edge to things, or at least the attitude of violence. The ultimate compliment was if somebody called you and said, "You bad." Now, this had been part of old Black Jive on and off a long time. Badass. Yeah, but we didn't use it until the late 60s. Remember the Chicago 7 trial? Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, and the others, and they gave them to a guy named Judge Julius Hoffman, who had the ultimate right-wing, old-school, Eisenhower-era legal attitude. So I remember he had one of them bound and gagged during much of the trial. Every one of them was a cartoon, right out of the fabulous furry Freak Brothers, and they behaved like that in court. Made fun of the judge, wore clown suits to the trial, that kind of thing. It was a pop trial. When they were acquitted, they all threw the power salute, but that was political. In 10th grade, people started throwing the power salute at rock concerts. It was something besides political. It was being bad together. Right around 10th grade, buying a t-shirt of your favorite band was crucial. Same thing for football teams, baseball teams, and so forth. I don't mean just a shirt that said Dodgers, but a person. A picture of Sandy Koufax, or a picture of Jimi Hendrix playing the guitar with the flames coming out the back. It became just as important to get the t-shirt as it was to have actually gone to the show. If you couldn't go to the show, you had your friend get you a t-shirt. It totally bespoke of who you were and where you were going. You saw somebody with a Black Sabbath t-shirt, you knew exactly who that person was. Somebody with a Led Zeppelin shirt, you knew exactly who that person was. By the way, in 10th grade, I got my first blowjob. It was from a girl named Cheryl, who was very advanced in a number of ways. She was a big, busty, very mature gal, great looking in a Jane Mansfield sort of way. She was always up helping the biology teacher, who was also the swim coach, who looked like Remington Steele, so you kind of knew something was up, and it probably belonged to the swim coach. Cheryl and I just fell in together one night at Frank Sousa's party when his parents went off to Mexico to go scuba diving. We went around the corner from his house and stood in a driveway just around inside of the hedge. She got down on her knees, and I remember looking right over her head. The shades were open in the living room of this neighbor's house. You could see the back of the owner's head. He was a little bald guy, and he was watching Johnny Carson. Buddy Hackett was the guest. Well, maybe it's not much to you, but I like to think back. Well, that wraps up part 2. Let me know what you thought of part 2 in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on